Chapter 20, Shattered Bonds. The circle emerged from the mountain's depths, battered and broken. The narrow passage had collapsed behind them, sealing them from the darkness below, sealing Waya in with it. The cold bite of morning air did little to cut through the suffocating weight in their chests. They stood in the thick of an ancient forest, the towering trees stretching toward the sky like silent watchers. Their branches wove a dense canopy overhead, filtering the weak light of dawn into ghostly streaks across the forest floor. The scent of damp earth filled their lungs, but it was tainted by the acrid burn of scorched stone and the lingering stench of fractured mana. No one spoke, because what was there to say? Waya was gone, and some of them believed it was Mako's fault. The accusation hung unspoken in the air, heavier than the weight of the mountain they had barely escaped. If Mako had not struck Aros, if Aros had not fallen, he could have saved them. He could have saved her. Dolo's knuckles turned white around the shaft of his spear. He had not let himself think it fully until now, but the moment his feet touched the damp forest earth, the moment they lived while Waya did not, he felt the truth of it like a knife driven into his ribs. Waya's death was not some inevitable tragedy. It was a choice, and Mako had made it, perhaps led by the words of Shadow. The silence shattered when Dolo moved. Mako barely had time to react before he was slammed into the rough bark of an ancient tree. The impact sent a dull, echoing crack through the clearing. Dolo's spear was at his throat. Mako didn't resist, didn't even raise his hands to stop him. "Your actions did this," Dolo hissed, his voice barely above a whisper, but the weight in it was a storm. Mako's jaw tightened, his breath coming in slow, measured exhales. "Did you betray us to the Shadow?" Dolo growled, his fingers tightening around the shaft of his spear. "Waya died back there, she—" His voice broke. His throat burned. "You nearly killed Aros." Still, Mako said nothing. Dolo pressed harder, the steel of his spear's tip grazing Mako's skin. "Say something." A long pause. Then, finally, "I didn't want this," Mako said softly. Dolo let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "You think that makes it better?" Mako's hands fisted at his sides. "I thought—" He exhaled sharply. "The earth, my mana, was guiding me. I thought it was right, that striking Aros would—" Dolo's rage surged anew. "Would what? Kill him?" "I don't know," Mako snapped, for the first time showing emotion, and for the first time he sounded afraid. He turned his head slightly, his expression raw, haunted. "Aros knew," he murmured. Silence. Everyone stared at him, stunned by the words. Mako swallowed, struggling to find the right words, his voice shaking. "He knew I was going to attack him. He saw it in me before I even did. He was waiting for it." Dolo's grip on his spear wavered. Kaylin's eyes darkened, her hand instinctively tightening around her staff. "You're saying what? That Aros let you attack him?" "I don't know," Mako whispered. "I just know. He wasn't surprised." The revelation settled uneasily between them, but it didn't change the facts. "You still struck him," Dolo said, his voice colder now. "And now he's dying." Kaylin's fingers twitched. The glow of her runes flickered erratically, barely restrained. She took a step forward, eyes burning with fury. "Because of you," she said, voice shaking. "Waya's dead. She is dead, Mako. And all you can do is sit there and tell us you didn't know." Mako closed his eyes for a moment, exhaling through his nose. Then softly, "I don't expect forgiveness." Kaylin let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "Then you won't be disappointed." Dolos looked down. Then he released his grip, shoving Mako backward. Mako stumbled slightly but didn't fall, didn't flinch. Dolo turned away, already kneeling back beside Aros. I don't care what you expected. You're not one of us anymore. Tyrion hadn't spoken. Not once. Not when Dolo lashed out. Not when Kaelin's anger crackled like wildfire. He stood where he was, watching Mako, his axe still slung across his back. Pip shifted closer to him, arms wrapped around her legs. "They're wrong," she murmured. Tyrion glanced at her, brow furrowed. Pip's ears flicked back. "I mean, yeah, he screwed up. Big time. But he wasn't trying to kill Eros. I know Mako. He wouldn't do that." Tyrion exhaled slowly. "Doesn't change what happened." Pip bit her lip. "It doesn't, but something doesn't add up." She looked at Mako again, voice dropping to a whisper. "What if there's more to this? What if they're too angry to see it?" Tyrion's gaze drifted back to Mako, still sitting there, silent beneath the weight of his own failure. He had fought beside enough warriors to know what guilt looked like. And Mako was drowning in it. Kaelin pressed her hands over Aros's chest, her inked runes glowing faintly. "His mana isn't just severed, it's drifting, like something is pulling it away from him." Tyrion huffed, glancing toward the towering trees. "Aye, and if we don't fix that soon, we'll lose the boy." Pip sat cross-legged a few feet away, arms folded, tail flicking, her eyes drifting over Aros. "Fixing him," Arindra murmured, "is easier said than done." They didn't have time for hesitation. "Then we find a way. We move," Dolo said, looking to Kaelin. Kaelin exhaled sharply, raking a hand through her hair. "The Valley of the First Light," she said suddenly. Dolo's glance toward her. "What?" "It's a legend," she continued. "A place where mana is untouched, uncorrupted. If anything can restore Aros, it's there." Dolo looked down at the boy, still too still, still fading, and made his decision. "Then we go," he said. The others nodded, a renewed sense of urgency in their eyes. Mako said nothing, because he knew he wouldn't be joining them. The silence between them was heavy. Mako stared at the ground for a long time. He knew the truth. He couldn't stay. He had already lost them. His hands curled into fists at his sides, tension riding up his spine. Then, finally, he lifted his gaze. "I can't stay." No one argued. Pip's ears flattened, her voice barely above a whisper. "Where will you go?" Mako didn't answer. He wasn't sure if there was an answer. Tyrion exhaled through his nose, rubbing a hand over his beard before speaking, his voice softer than expected. "Lad, you don't have to do this. You made a mistake, aye, but running won't fix it. We've all lost people." His copper eyes met Mako's, steady but not unkind. "Ain't no shame in fighting to make things right." Mako's throat tightened. He wanted to believe that. He wanted to believe there was still a place for him among them. But the weight of his choices sat heavy on his shoulders, an anchor he couldn't shake. He shook his head, voice strained. "I don't know." Tyrion sighed, glancing toward Dolo as if hoping for him to say something, something that might sway Mako's decision. But Dolo's face remained unreadable, the firelight casting deep shadows across his features. When he finally spoke, his voice was cold, sharp as the edge of his spear. "Good, then don't come back." Mako flinched, but only slightly. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. No one stopped him. No one called after him. His footsteps faded into the trees, and just like that, Mako was gone.